10 bold predictions. That is what we're going to do today for the fantasy football season on RotoViz Overtime. We are drafting in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, and each selection that we make, we are going to come up with some hot takes, some bold predictions as to why they are the greatest picks that have ever been made and why we are charging towards the first place prize. It is $125 to enter in this format. Shawn, we are going to be drafting here in a 12-team league. We advanced from that, and then it's quite simple. We just have to advance each time from 12-team pods for those 3 playoff weeks to come up with the top prize of $300,000. So that is what we're doing today on the RotoViz Overtime podcast. But we drew the 101 once again, Shawn. So we can probably get ahead of the curve because we have that first pick. And we had the 101 in the last one of these we did. You know, I have mentioned this in the past, kind of given out a little bit about having the 101. You can't give out too much. And Shawn rightly, pointed me in the direction before we started recording that you may not have many 101s the rest of the draft season. This could be the last one we have. So you should enjoy them while you have them. And because of that, you have the opportunity to draft in Ja'Marr Chase at the top of the board. There is obviously Bijan Robinson. I would put Jahmyr Gibbs in there. You could potentially think about taking a Brock Bowers, but you probably will pick up some draft slots, 103 through 107, where you may get a chance to get some of those names. So Chase for me, Shawn, is the selection that I think we'll be making here in a moment. Is there any reason that you would potentially go in a different direction at the 101 this year? Obviously, Justin Jefferson could have been in that conversation, back at practice now, but, with the hamstring, those niggles might just separate Chase from the pack a little bit at the wide receiver position too. Any thoughts here on a non-Chase selection before we give our Ja'Marr Chase bold prediction?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only way that you would go away from Ja'Marr Chase would be to take Brock Bowers, who, has an ADP further down the board. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're just going to have a lot more opportunities to get Bowers than you will to get Chase. Now, you might like Bowers with the guys you're going to get at the, the 2-3 turn, the 4-5 turn, some of those types of considerations. But no, basically, when you have this top pick, it is Ja'Marr Chase. And I mean, there's a full tier break here. So I don't think you're going to go any other direction.
Yeah, and just when we're on that topic, and I'm giving out about having the 101, the listeners can let us know, Shawn, whether it's Twitter DMs or X DMs or through email or in the YouTube comments, what is their favorite draft slot for 2025? I like that 5 through 7 slot, trying to get one of those guys in the second round. We'll see who may fall to us here, Shawn, in round 2, and then who maybe we'll have to pull up at that 301, maybe from that lower tier. Shawn had a great piece up on rotoviz.com talking through a secondary breakout that we could be looking at here in 2025. But you did mention, Shawn, kind of, is it going to be a secondary breakout or is it just going to be something that we've got a little bit overhyped on? I think you called him potentially a cult hero. So we'll see if we get into drafting him at the 301 selection, but that is up on rotoviz.com to see if this particular player can follow in the footsteps of CeeDee Lamb, DeAndre Hopkins, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. We take Ja'Marr Chase, Shawn. We'll pull up the draft board here and we'll see how the rest of the round plays out. But Ja'Marr Chase, hit me with a bold prediction. It's hard to have a bold prediction for somebody who is putting in the fantasy numbers throughout the start of his career, like a Ja'Marr Chase, what we seen last year. I know there was one of the weeks in the FFPC Main Event where myself and yourself were 40 points, I believe, ahead, and we were waiting, with Ja'Marr Chase to play against us on Monday Night Football against the Dallas Cowboys, and it was quite scary when it got towards the end of that particular contest. So, bold prediction time, Shawn. Ja'Marr Chase.
I believe the week you're talking about is the one that he hit 45 points, and
I think we had a 40-point lead, but or around that, but we also had Chase Brown playing. He did get a touchdown in that game, so we were kind of trying to skirt between a little bit of a window.
Yeah, and Colm, that was a fun one because I needed Ja'Marr Chase to absolutely go off with Ben to pull something out. So that was one of the fun thread the needle Monday nights. You've got to love that. Colm, as you mentioned, it's hard to get too crazy when you have a player who a season ago 10 targets per game, 100 yards per game, a full touchdown per game. He's the type of player who can beat you deep. he has a bunch of air yards because he has so many targets, but he was actually used quite a bit underneath, and that run after the catch is a huge part of why his racer is so high, but also just the dynamism, right? When you can get behind the defense, but you're also a well-rounded type of threat. I mentioned in the article that you just referenced how players like Ja'Marr Chase are so good with the ball in hand. That's one of the reasons that we really liked Malik Neighbors ahead of Marvin Harrison, with those guys coming out last year. Chase really just the prototypical superstar, or he has that 4.3 speed. We think about that game against the Kansas City Chiefs a few years ago, where it basically determined all of the fantasy tournament titles because he was able to consistently get behind Kansas City. I think went off for 3 touchdowns, several of which were of the very, very long variety. But Colm, with T. Higgins there in tow, the target share last season below 30%. You contrast that to some guys like a Justin Jefferson and Malik Neighbors. You can push that into the 30, 31, 32% range. T. Higgins, a player who does miss a lot of time with injury. You combine what the floor is here, and certainly, 1,717 is not the floor. But you think about what a realistic floor is, and then you look at the Bengals, who last season were second in dropbacks. SIS has them 35 dropbacks clear of the team that was in fourth, the Dallas Cowboys. That gives you a sense of how gapped they really are from even the other high volume passing teams. The Bengals sort of this perfect storm type of offense where you expect the offense to be very dynamic, to put pressure on the opponents, and yet their defense is weak enough that when the opponents attack, they score. And so this is the shootout situation that you absolutely have to get a passer to go off at these levels, to get a receiver to go off at these levels. When you get that, when you have a Joe Burrow and you have a Ja'Marr Chase, Colin, we don't know when it's going to happen, but essentially, and especially now with the 17 game season, we are going to see someone get to the 2,000 receiving yards. Calvin Johnson, Megatron, finished just short of that in his best season. We're going to get a 2020 season sometime in the next 5 years. Guys like Malik Neighbors, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb would appear to be your best bets for that type of a season. But Ja'Marr Chase, he gives you that threat every single year. I think we have a real chance that he completely resets the threshold, resets the ceiling standard for wide receivers in this 2025 campaign.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Now we are 30 seconds, 25 seconds left on the clock here at the 2:12 as we work our way through that. Shawn, we did miss out on George Kittle by 2 picks. AJ Brown went just before us. I'll make the pitch here for Tyreek Hill and potentially a JSN selection. Is there anyone that you have over Tyreek Hill at this pick?
I still really like Chase Brown here, and that gives you a chance to really lean into the Cincinnati offense. I believe it's an approach that I
We
took
took.
with Ben on a
We did it
recent.
as well.
Okay. And Zachary Kruger, I've also been doing it. So it's one of my favorite ways to approach this. I don't think we have to approach it that way. And Colm, I think the other pick here for me would be Omarion Hampton. So JSN, Hampton, those would be the two guys I would be leaning to for the second pick. We did take Tyreek Hill as the first of the two. He's very easy to make aggressive predictions about.
Yeah, with Hampton, I would probably be willing to risk it and push to see if I don't think there's any fault or status, Shawn, but JSN would give us a chance to talk about your article, and I think that might be a fun way to pair it in there. To start off with Hill and JSN, I do like the Chase Brown selection you made and mentioned, but I do like to have some fun on these and diversify them a bit to talk about different players for the listeners. That mightn't be the best way to win the tournament, but I do like having Tyreek Hill and JSN at that point. We've talked quite a bit about the third round being a little bit challenging at the wide receiver position. They're two of the names that I would be prioritizing to do. That's one of the other reasons that I'm not as big a fan of the 101, for example. George Kittle went up to 210. It's a Ja'Marr Chase, George Kittle start, but there is the possibility of getting Kittle there. And we've found ourselves a little bit at the 101 having challenges with getting that elite tight end onto the roster. And the last one, I believe we did reach, I can't remember if it was Sam Laporta or TJ Hawkinson, but the kind of multi-pick reach to get on that. So you mentioned Hampton. We might get to that when he is selected here, because I would expect him to get selected before it would come back to us. But Shawn, we'll start with the JSN selection because we kind of touched on the article. And reading the article, you can get very, very excited. Then Shawn will have a bit where it's like, temper your expectations. Then it'll be like, put your expectations through the roof. And then at the end, it's like, he is playing with Sam Darnold. So there's a nice little read to go through. But one of the things that you always have to have that little bit of humility at this point of the draft season. And I mentioned where his ADP sat because it was with Sam Darnold and the changes in the offense, that it was a little bit high for me at the start of draft season. But one of the things that you do mention towards the end of that is with some of the receivers in this range, the ADP is kind of factoring in that the offense, will have some success. Whereas with JSN, we're kind of factoring in that there's going to be some potential offensive issues throughout the course of this season with Sam Darnold. And we are kind of thinking that that may be the case. But then you factor in that if he can be, kept in a system that keeps him on time and, doesn't have him seeing ghosts as he has in the past and did, towards the end of last season, that the upside for JSN in this offense is huge. And we've seen him take that step forward last year. And like the other guys that go in this range are like classed as, a step or a tier above him in terms of, superstar status. But I think that like looking at a player who's had 2 pretty strong years, the rookie season didn't go how we wanted, but he had the wrist injury in the off season. We're set up now for him as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Obviously Cooper Kupp's there, but the end of his last season was not promising. Hit me with your bold take for JSN after writing multiple hundreds, if not thousands of words about him over the past week or so.
Well, this was not as long as the article last year explaining why you wanted to jump on board. But essentially with JSN, you have this cohort of players who, when scoring in his range in year 2, go on to be very, very good players. Talk a little bit about Blair's research on the secondary breakout phenomenon. And you can certainly imagine the next step, getting over those 300 points, but also just building off of other work that Blair and I have done and tying it into the Xavier Worthy piece and this idea of the 21-year-old rookies, what they do. You look at this group of players who was originally, 21-year-old rookies, but then obviously 22-year-old sophomores score in this range, first round picks. You just have massive blow up potential. You have DeAndre Hopkins scoring 331 in year 2. You have David Boston scoring over 300. You have Mike Evans scoring over 300. David Boston obviously happens a long time back, but you also have that CD Lamb sort of initial. I mean, Lamb continues to break out at different levels and then secondary breakout, tertiary breakout, et cetera, et cetera. He obviously had the 400-point season there as well. But it sets up very nicely. Then you look at, JSN, who is he? I ranked the best yard per route run seasons, including context of who players are playing against, what their environment is, that sort of thing from the last 5 years. And he comes in number 1 ahead of guys like Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy, but also ahead of guys like Malik Neighbors and Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb. Those players ranked 4, 5, and 6. They had extraordinary seasons in college. Their prospect profiles were immaculate. They are 3 of the top 4 receivers right now by ADP. The point being that JSN kind of fits into that group and really was that level of prospect probably. Then you dive into his 2024 numbers. You look at some of these similarities between guys like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp when they were early on and the type of offense that Seattle will run this next year. You look at his 2024 season, second most slot targets behind Amon-Ra, the third most slot air yards behind London and Ridley, the third most slot yards after the catch behind Chase, whom we've already drafted, and Khalil Shakir. You combine all of those types of things, and then you think about where the next step is. You've got quotes from, teammates on offense, including Cup, saying that he's a great competitor. He's ready to take the next step. You've got his defensive teammates talking about him as not being just a slot receiver, that this guy is going to take the leap. Colm, you look at all of those elements together and think about how little competition he has. It's really the concern about this, Seattle offense and the Sam Darnold effect. Possibly what happens if they go to Jalen Milroe, which I'm more optimistic will happen than most. That causes some of the problems that you get from the hybrid QBs. You put all of that together and you're thinking, okay, there are some problems here, and yet the upside is significant. I'm going to say 300 points, right? You get that secondary breakout. JSN 300-point season in 2025.
Awesome. So we're 2 picks away, Shawn. I'm very excited here because if I could get Sam Laporta and Ted McMillan at this turn, I would be very happy. Ted McMillan went off the board. Please, Sam Laporta, don't get drafted here. But we also have a range of other options that will be interesting. RJ Harvey, Devontae Smith, Travis Hunter would be in the mix for me as well. Any names that I haven't mentioned there, Shawn, that would be of note? Both of those guys go off the board back to back. That's a crushing blow. So, Shawn, tell me who you would like to pitch for here at the 4 and 5 turn.
Well, we started with the 3 receivers. I thought that one of the reasons that was so much fun was because it would allow us to get some of these rookies. I still do not have the exposures to RJ Harvey and TreVeyon Henderson that I
Okay.
want. I think if you add both of them here, it gets pretty exciting. Do you have a third
Well, I'm
name that we
100% on board with the Harvey pick, and then we can have a look here at the Henderson pick as well. I did push you on the Omarion Hampton pick. He did go at the 307, so I'm kind of opening the door to the pick here to get the second rookie running back. This running back range, there's Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, and definitely looking down to Henderson as that next running back option. So with the tree that we started off with, and I did push you a little bit. I think you wanted to get Hampton there. I'm open to going Henderson. You'd like Henderson over Smith and Hunter, I'm assuming here.
Yeah, I think the next 2 receivers for me are probably George Pickens and Jameson Williams. I don't have any problem bringing them up. You probably have shots at them a little bit.
Yeah, there's a chance they might
You know,
mix it through. Yeah, let's do it. Let's see how it plays out. I know, Shawn, there's times here where Shawn's pulling up the running back names, and I continue to try and bat them away. It's like Shawn is a former high level tennis player. I'm not a good tennis player, but I wanted to get the analogy in there. Kind of backhanding away some of these serves that Shawn's delivering in. But we get RJ Harvey, TreVeyon Henderson. We've had 2 real hot takes to kick it off with Jamar Chase and JSN. I don't think we have to go too deep, Shawn, on the Tyreek Hill case, but I'll open the door for a quick recap of why Tyreek Hill is, an advantageous wide receiver in best ball. I guess the one thing we could say and play against is, he has had some injuries lingering over the last couple of seasons, but has been able to play through the majority of them. A lot of it comes down to the QB scenarios, but no Jonnu Smith there any longer. I think other than age, everything is in a pretty good spot here for Tyreek Hill.
yeah. I mean, you look at Tyreek Hill across 2022 and 2023, he scored he scored fewer than 2 points less than 700. And
It's
the
pretty
wide
good.
receiver 3 over that time did not hit 600 points. So when we talk about Tyreek Hill and how he has the rest of the field gapped in terms of non-chase upside, it's really straightforward, right? I mean, you're talking about a 340-point season followed by a 380-point season. He's got 2 other 300-point seasons in there. I mean, why isn't this the year that he goes for the 400? Maybe he stays healthy. They play him a little bit more because they're so desperate. I mean, this is a collapsing Dolphins team where people are going to get fired after the season. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing. We already are getting finger pointing in camp. Tua's talking about basically that he doesn't trust him and is not trustworthy. And I think it's really important that people drafting Hill are okay with that. Hill is not a good practice guy. He is not a good meeting guy. He's not a good off the field guy. all of those things are blatantly true
They
even
are.
before you get all the bizarre stuff like him claiming he didn't know the offense the last 3 seasons. It's like, why don't you go to some practices? Why don't you listen in the meetings? You would have some sense of what's going on. Tyreek Hill is just relying on his immense physical talent and admitting to everyone in the world that he doesn't try hard for his team, that his football integrity is as bad as his regular integrity. Yeah, I mean, those are things you probably should just keep to yourself, but that's not a surprise to anybody, right? And yet he's been able to do those things despite that. It doesn't make me feel great about having him on my teams, but when you consider again the massive drop from whether you want to have Lad McConkey as in the top tier or sort of as a transitionary kind of piece before this, huge tier break. I mean, it's just a huge tier break, right? So I think that you've got to consider Tyreek Hill there because when you go Chase Hill, you're basically taking two of the three guys who can score 400 points. Probably shouldn't still be available there. But yeah, I mean, still massive problems with him as someone who's reliable for his reality team. And then that obviously filters back to you as a fantasy manager relying on him for your teams.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything Shawn has said. The off the field concerns are certainly there, but the on field talent is something that you want to have on fantasy rosters. Shawn, we have had a bit of a clear out of some of the players we would like to draft. Jameson Williams went, Devontae Smith, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, Travis Hunter, TJ Hawkinson. At that last pick, I would have been interested to see if I could have got Sam Laporte onto this roster with those two rookies there. Can we sneak an RJ Harvey bold prediction in? Because we've talked about him a lot. The listeners will know our thoughts on him in the interim before we get on the clock in 6 picks.
We'll call him RJ Harvey. Alvin Kamara scored 322 points in 16 games as a rookie. He was the overall running back 3. He came back with 354 points in 15 games in his second season. RJ Harvey is a rich man's version of Alvin Kamara. He is going to beat that 354 points that Kamara got in year 2. He's going to beat it in year 1, in part aided by that extra game. We're going to get 355 plus fantasy points for RJ Harvey.
That's pretty bold, Shawn, to kick it off. We got that one done nice and sharp. We will give TreVeyon Henderson, I think, a little bit of time when it gets around the corner because we haven't talked as much about him. Omarion Hampton, Shawn, the player that I didn't let you draft. Obviously, you're very excited about him to think about taking him there at the 301. Is that based on rankings prior to any news with Najee Harris, or is that with the expectation that he will now have a higher control of that backfield entering week 1?
I guess I just have never really cared very much about Najee Harris, in part because I would have expected him to soak up the low value touches in this backfield. I think those will now be taken by somebody else. I don't think that actually makes the offense less efficient because Najee Harris is not good. And so if it ends up actually just making the offense a little bit more passing centric, that probably also helps Omarion Hampton in that you have more upside for touchdowns, teams scoring more quickly. Certainly it helps Justin Herbert, it helps Lad McConkey, it helps those guys. The Hampton bet is essentially this combination of really high talent ceiling and then really high situational floor. But I do think it's one where even though the floor in this Chargers offense with Harbaugh and the rest of the pieces that go with that also means it's got a low ceiling. So that's the part that keeps me, you, anybody. I mean, it basically makes it so there are other viable picks, which if that weren't the case, then it'd be like, Colm, we've got to take Hampton, right? With the low ceiling that a run based offense that doesn't pass to the backs creates, you can pass on it, even though, again, I mean, he sucked pretty nicely. He'll do pretty well.
We are back on the clock. I mentioned that run of players that went. Then in the run up to us, it was Baker Mayfield, Travis Kelce, followed by Ingram, then David Montgomery. So we are back in the clock, back to back picks. I think Shawn is pretty clear here that we will take Jerry Jeudy with the first of those. Is that where you want to lean with the first one?
No, I think Jeudy is really straightforward. The next name that you have here is Olave. That probably is also fairly straightforward. It would have been interesting to consider a Dunze if he hadn't gone. This
Yeah.
is his ADP range as well. So go ahead and grab Jeudy there. That's a really nice piece to be able to add in to the wide receiver room, having drafted those two running backs. I continue to be pretty nervous about Olave's concussions, his
Yep.
lack of any sort of run after the catch.
Hmm.
I do think that they may set the NFL back, basically 100 years with their quarterback play this season. Now, the flip side of that is that they'll have to throw a lot of passes. And there's a
Have you
limit
any
to how
interest in a
Olave could be
counter?
this year's version of Jerry Jeudy,
Yeah.
right? Where so go ahead.
So I was going to say Jerry Jeudy kind of does fit the mold of what happened with Olave last year. Bad offense, but still was able to be productive. The other player, if I was looking at a wide receiver, would be Juwan Jennings. Obviously, he's having his contract and injury issues at the minute. And then you kind of get down to a Jaylen Warren, who I'm less likely to take after going running back through 4 and 5. So that was kind of like a pretty flat, non-sexy area off the draft. The other player, I'm kind of looking at there is a Jordan Addison, who does go 2 picks later. I was waiting to see if there might be a little bit of a slide. We're still waiting and expecting his suspension news. Interesting that the team that does take Jordan Addison also did take Rashee Rice. They were the team that drafted Ted McMillan. So, Addison could fit in there, and there's probably more confidence, in his season-long outcome versus Olave. But Olave kind of, for me, fits a little bit into that part where we're talking with JSN with, what if the offense is somewhat, able to move the ball. I think that there's a lot less chance that that's going to be the case with the Saints, but I think that they're a team that's going to be behind in a lot of games. They're going to have to score, and I think that could lead to opportunities and targets going the way of Olave. The concussions is a concern, but it's more a case of if he's out there and playing that, you would hope that he doesn't consistently receive those concussions or those headshots. Probably a little bit more concerned if it was somebody who has like consistent soft tissue injuries. Although for Olave's long-term health, it's not good, the concussion stuff, but recurring wise, I'd be more concerned going the other way. And you're getting everything with Olave that you could possibly get discounted at this point of the draft at the 701, I think is kind of factored into that. Going back, Shawn, to try and catch up with these bold predictions, we have TreVeyon Henderson, rookie wide receiver number 2, or running back number 2 on the roster. I know that this was a class we were very excited about. You've already touched on Hampton. We've touched on Harvey. Henderson stepping into another offense, Shawn, that, if we're looking at questionable offenses here with the, the Seahawks, the Saints, the Browns, we can put the Patriots into that conversation too. How does Henderson elevate this offense? Or maybe it's a good thing that they might be a team that's also trailing from behind and we can get some of those, dump off passes going the way of Henderson in garbage time.
Yeah, so this isn't the rookie version of James White, which is relevant, right? This is a potential like build into the volume situation for TreVeyon, which is why his price is in that range. You think about James White did with Josh McDaniels, and across the 2018 and 2019 seasons, he went for almost 220 targets, gained over almost 1,400 receiving yards, scored 11 receiving touchdowns. The Patriots don't have much of anything in the passing game. They need to develop Drake May. They need to have this outlet for him, a safety valve. You think about TreVeyon Henderson, a player with immense physical talent. He's a crazy athlete. Where they drafted him and where their team currently is, he needs to play a lot, and he's going to need to play a lot as a pure runner, right? We think about all the way back to his freshman year in college, where he was an instant superstar when he did that. Now, last season, kind of that re-breakout, but alongside Quinshon Judkins was just so much more explosive, was a great runner, was an electric receiver. I think because of the situation at Ohio State, people are not looking at Henderson as the level of receiving back that he likely will be at the NFL level. My bold prediction for Henderson will be that he leads the running back position in receptions this year. And if he does that, I
The
mean, he's going to
entire
be
running
insane
back
ADP.
position.
The entire, yeah, not rookies,
Okay.
and not that it's a nice combination of receiving with other things. I think he leads the running back position in receptions.
Well, that is a pretty bold prediction, and if that works out, Shawn, the 5th round is a very appealing place to be able to select him. Jerry Jeudy, again, a player we've talked a lot about, a player that's quite polarizing in the fantasy football community. You look at what he did last year, there's a lot of it with Jameis Winston. Now he's in a situation where there's a merry-go-round of QBs that could potentially fall in there. But he is somebody who we kind of were waiting and waiting and waiting on the full breakout to occur. We had seen some flashes, but there was certainly a huge breakout in the back half of last season. And if we can continue that again in the late 6th round at the 6-12, that is going to be exciting. Hit me with your bold prediction and tell me, is Joe Flacco the starting quarterback for the entire season?
No, I don't think we're going to get Flacco the whole way. I think we are going to get Dillon Gabriel. I think he will play well. I think he will make things work just fine for Jeudy. And we think about Jeudy, he had the 3 wide receiver 1 finishes down the stretch last season, 4 games where he went over 20 points. He had that revenge game against the Denver Broncos where he scored over 40 points. He's someone who is elite before the catch. He's elite with the ball in his hands after the catch. He's gotten terrible quarterback play in his NFL career, and he has been pretty fragile. Those are the 2 things that you really have to look at. There is this concern with him that's legitimate, right? I talked about all of those targets that were available last season for Jamar Chase because the Bengals threw so many passes. The Browns Colm dropped back 41 more times, according to SIS, than even the Bengals. That number is likely to drop by, in the vicinity of 100 dropbacks, if not more. And so you add a healthy Cedric Tillman, you have David Njoku breaking out, you have the team adding Harold Fannin, you have some concerns about even peripheral players beyond that being involved. And there is the potential for things simply to cut into his targets in a way that requires him to be more efficient, and that efficiency case is tough if the QB play is poor. But I think that Joe Flacco will play pretty well. The team will struggle because they can't run the ball with the situation that's going on there. As they can't run the ball, I think they'll run the ball effectively, but they're not going to be this team that just lines up and bulldozes you. Also, there are still plenty of questions about their defense, which is the real kind of shift that we've gotten in Cleveland over the last several years. That also facilitates these shootouts in the same way that it does for the Cincinnati Bengals. The Browns are good enough to not simply go into a shell, be bad, lose boring games. That's what your concern is if you have a bad team. But when you are the Browns, when you have a very competent head coach in Kevin Stefanski, and then you've got these interesting players, and Colin, they're going to be faced with this question over the second half of the season, like how conservatively do we play this and try and not get fired versus just do we do our jobs and explore whether or not Dillon Gabriel can play, perhaps explore whether or not Sanders can play, depending on different health elements and just who they keep on the roster, explore whether or not Kenny Pickett can play. I think these guys are going to all be a lot more viable than either Deshaun Watson or Dorian Thompson Robinson. And you're going to get a lot of passes and you're going to get a lot of fantasy points from Jerry Jeudy, who builds on what he did last year and breaks 250 points.
Let's go. Let's go. So we'll see if Chris Olave gets some of that same talking point in a minute. But we are 3 picks away as Khalil Shakir and Chris Godwin go off the board. Sean Tucker-Kraft, I was wondering if he may slide through. Cam Scatterby was somebody I was hoping would slide through. He goes 2 picks before ours. This is an area of the draft where it gets very flat and not all that exciting through rounds 8 and 9. Kyler Murray was somebody we drafted together, Sean, in that previous draft at the 101. He went off the board. So we are back on the clock. Is there any names that you would want to pitch here? We have quite a few QBs in the queue, and we're obviously top heavy at wide receiver so far, but there is a couple of wide receivers in this area, and Reed and Downs that would be interesting. But what direction do you want to take us here?
Yeah, I think to get this price on Jayden Reed is a slam dunk. Josh Downs is maybe less interesting to me if we have a 50-50 or a 60-40 with Anthony Richardson potentially winning that battle. One of the things that we have done with the receivers that we have drafted to this point is we've opened ourselves up to the possibility of being able to take someone late like a Tua, but the rest of the situations are more or less hands off, which gives us a chance to take someone like a Justin Fields or a Caleb Williams without having a stack situation set up. I'm perfectly fine with that, but it is also at least vaguely intriguing to go ahead and just take Bo Nix as the best value on the board and pair him with a late option
The
for the
one that I would make
Broncos.
on next, just before we would make that pick, is that he would have the same bye week as Tua if we did want to go that direction. We obviously don't have to do that. You want to take next and see what happens?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take Nix.
Okay. So Nix would have the same bye week, but I think that's a fun pick to make. One of our boys as a rookie from 2024, we get him in there playing. It's just kind of a situation where unless we take some of those later guys, but we're kind of loading up here at wide receiver, that we may not need to do that. So at this point, 2 running backs, 1 QB, and then we're loaded up with the 6 wide receivers through that particular point. It was an area of the draft where I felt QB was the option. I was kind of tempted to lean towards Justin Fields in that particular example, but I like to get the Bo Nix pick there as well. Shawn, we have 3 to hit here before we cut this edition of RotoViz OT off. Chris Olave, bowl prediction time. Is it as simple as the 2025 version of Jerry Jeudy?
I think so. I mean, you look at Olave going back through his rookie season, and I mean, you're getting 49% of his weeks are wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 weeks. You've got a lot of games there in green, a lot of games of 20 plus points. You don't have the massive spike weeks for Olave, in part again because of that limitation after the catch and just how bad the Saints offense has been during the stretch. But because the Saints offense has been poor, one of the things that we don't have to calibrate to as directly is this idea of how much the QB play is going to hurt his 2025 ceiling. I do think that the head coach they have in position here is not going to feel any pressure to win. Now we say that, and obviously the Patriots did make a very quick change with Mayo a season ago, but I think trying these guys out, even if Tyler Shook is absolutely terrible, which is what at least the college numbers suggest will be the case, you could get passing and passing and passing. You have that dome, you have these NFC South games that, I mean, so many of them should shoot out. That's the division that, if everything else is equal, I kind of like to target, because you've got these goofy teams with the Falcons, with our Panthers, certainly with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where you're probably going to get good weather. You've got a lot of domes, and the shootouts, even if the teams aren't great, are going to happen. And so I like that element of it. A lot of red flags with Olave, but the prices that we're getting on him when everything else is flat. I mean, I really would like to have Jordan Addison there, but I have a lot of Addison, and I just want to be a little bit circumspect until we know exactly what the situation is with the suspension and get the further ADP penalty. I do think people understand he's going to be suspended. I do think that they're kind of trying to factor that in. I still think he will drop once the suspension is announced. And then we go right back to loading up on Jordan Addison there instead.
So I love the way they are now our Panthers as well. Shawn, Jayden Reed, back to the rookie season success. Matthew Golden's obviously there as well. He went 2 picks later.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the rookie season success, that's a big thing. The peripherals suggest that he was one of the most dynamic receivers in all of football last year when they were able to get the ball in his hands. This element where he doesn't play in the 3 receiver sets is, I think, pretty terrifying. And yet at the same time, I mean, this is a guy who's basically going to score 200 points for you, even if none of that works out. Now, maybe he runs the ball even less. I mean, maybe they take the best guy on their team and remove him from the offense completely. Colm, if that happens, then it's just so hard to control. I think the scenario with Reed is just that his floor is basically already crushing ADP here. So why are you worried about this other element? If we're wrong on that element, and or the Packers are more aggressive just in total passes, he just cruises by it at will. I mean, this is just a straightforward 250 point score. He gets that, JSN season from last year without even having to work that hard.
Yeah, and I went through with Connor O'Driscoll. We were in a back and forth. I pushed him to pick Reed in one of our best ball slow drafts. And if you look at everything last year, the amount of times the Packers passed it, without getting to 20 pass attempts in games, the games where Love was out, the situations all through it. And you mentioned kind of the floor being priced in. If the Packers go back to passing the ball heavy and any of these things fall in Reed's favor, the ceiling is huge here at the 8th round ADP. Shawn, Bo Nix, the last one before we get here to the end of episode 1.
Yeah, I think all of those things with Jayden Reed are much bigger concerns if you're trying to figure out how to deploy him in redraft. Colm, you look at week 5 on last season, Nix was already at 23 points per game. Had a little bit of slowdown in the last month outside of the game that the Chiefs tanked, start out that playoff game with the long touchdown pass to Troy Franklin. I just think that pass to Troy Franklin is going to hit this year. It's similar to the case with Xavier Worthy and Patrick Mahomes, where it was just so bizarre that they missed all of those, coming off of being teammates. Franklin is going to play better. They have extended Cortland Sutton, much to my dismay, but it does give them just even much safer ceiling. He's going to be surrounded by such crazy weapons. He's going to run some. I've been a little bit reluctant to take him at the price, but I do think you want Bo Nix exposure. Anytime that you get him a little bit below ADP and are in a flat area, which is what happened to us here, we didn't have any other clear picks, grab him up every time in that situation. QB3 Colm.
So we are going to do something here, Shawn, that I hadn't planned. We are going to make these 2 picks as a teaser for people to come back and listen to part 2 as we do the bold predictions the rest of the way through for these particular picks. We're 1 pick away. We are in a situation, again, very flat area of the draft. Quarterback kind of being the majority of the options here. Picks by ADP would be Judkins, Jonnu Smith, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams. Listeners will know they're probably not on the board here for us. A lot of the quarterbacks then Goff, Herbert, Lawrence. Then you get down to Ramondre Stevenson, but it's Jordan Love, CJ Stroud. Shawn, looking down, though, we get down to the likes of Tootin, we get Blue, we get Garando, some interesting running backs there. Isaiah Likely as well, could fit in as a potential tight end, even though he has picked up that injury. Will be back for the start of the season, could fit in there. What are you thinking here as we're 1 pick away? Who are some of the options? Are you looking kind of at those rookie running backs and then potentially Likely?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at this here, and certainly we've got a huge problem brewing at tight end, but I think that this becomes a Jordan. We got all these J's. I'm talking about Jaden Blue here in a second. We have Jordan Love, I think, as a good fit with that Jayden Reed pick. And then you end up having the 2 QBs in the window. You have that balance nicely there. So even though it's a little bit above ADP, I would probably go that direction. And then Colm, we obviously had the fantastic rhetoric around Jaden Blue. I devoted an entire piece to him this last week. I think you probably have to come out of this spot with him, even though maybe he would come back around.
The reason I like that as well with the Jordan Love pick, if you want to make that one first, is it's going to open up that area where we really are going to have to look at hitting tight end. So if we don't hit Likely here, it's still going to be a similar situation. We're going to probably want to get to 4 tight ends, and we're going to have to take them ahead of ADP. So we're less likely to be able to go into some of those tight ends a little bit later as well. So it kind of fits strategically. I really like the Jayden Blue pick as well, mainly because I can already feel the heat all the way across the Atlantic Ocean from the hot take that Shawn is going to have here for Jayden Blue in the next episode when we get to that point. So our team so far, Bo Nix, Jordan Love at QB. We have RJ Harvey, TreVeyon Henderson, Jayden Blue, at running back. All rookies across the board. Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, JSN, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Olave, Jayden Reed at wide receiver. We will come back. We'll give those 2 predictions, and then we'll hit the rest of the picks to see what we do at the tight end position on the next edition of RotoViz Overtime. Make sure you subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get those once they are available. Let us know what you think of these selections, predictions, and so on so far. You can do that in the YouTube comments or get in touch through Twitter or email. You can email across at rotovizradio@gmail.com. You can also sign up over at RotoViz and save yourself 10% off a RotoViz NFL pass with the code RVRadio2025. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on social media at Overtime Ireland. Of course, you can check out Shawn and his great work up on rotoviz.com, including the JSN piece that we referenced earlier in the show. And until we are back, have a good one.